Hello, people. This is a Konocha series. I want to talk about this Ukraine-Russian war that has been ongoing for 3+ years. You see, I don't want to talk about it, but because I've been watching so many analysts, so many commentators on this issue, discussing things that concern this war. But I feel like using this opportunity to air my own views. The way I perceive the war, the way I perceive the root causes of the war, the way I perceive whatever thing that must have transpired. And I want to say this, but before I continue, just listen to this guy.
This is why Putin invaded Ukraine. And I'm going to make this clear and easy and give you an example that you can't argue with. So please reserve your comments until after the video. 1 full year before the war in Ukraine began, Zelensky signed a decree commanding Ukraine to take back Crimea. That's public record. Then Ukraine moved 60 to 80,000 troops into the east and into the south. You think Russia missed that? Meanwhile, NATO was running massive war games from the Black Sea all the way up to the Baltics. And the U.S. spy planes were buzzing the border nonstop. You think Russia didn't notice that? In November 21, just 3 months before the invasion, the U.S. and Ukraine signed a strategic partnership. And in that agreement, they spelled out two things: Ukraine joining NATO and taking back Crimea, remembering that Russia already had Crimea. A month later, January 22, NATO invited Ukraine to help write Agenda 2030. That's NATO's strategic roadmap. And remember, Ukraine isn't in NATO. Why was none of this ever reported? Because it would have destroyed the victim narrative Zelensky and the globalists were selling you. Now, let me put this in perspective. What if Mexico moved 80,000 troops to the Texas border? What would Washington do? What if Russian warplanes started buzzing along the Rio Grande to support Mexico? You think America would just sit back? Or if the old Warsaw Pact invited Mexico in and even let them help write its strategy paper for 2030 with the stated goal of taking back Texas, do you think Washington would react? And if that wasn't enough, imagine Russian and Mexican intelligence launched an operation. Let's call it Operation Tequila, setting up 12 secret spy bases along the Mexican border with Texas. You think the U.S. would just shrug? Because that's exactly what was happening on Russia's border. The New York Times itself admitted that over the past 8 years, the CIA and MI6 helped build 12 secret spy bases in Ukraine. They trained Ukrainian intelligence, set up forward operations bases, even taught agents how to blend in. They called it Operation Goldfish. You think that wouldn't get Russia's attention? Well, all this is what Russia saw happening on its border, and they acted like America would have. And how America acted during the Cuban Missile Crisis, by the way. These aren't internet rumors. These are facts. And they prove how deep the West was invested in this war before it even started. So when people tell you Putin just woke up in February 22 and decided to invade, just ask yourself, how far back are you willing to go to find the real reasons? Because February isn't the start. It's just a date that fits the narrative. Nothing about this began on February 22. But the press and the leaders who want to sell you lies, well, they start the clock at the exact moment that makes their story look good. And if you dare to point out the full timeline, well, like I do, you get called a Putin supporter. No, this is not taking Putin's side. It just means you're awake. And all of this is why Putin invaded Ukraine. But in the end, here's the frightening cold truth. If Russia takes Ukraine, it's gone. If the West controls it, it's gone. The country has already been sacrificed on the altar of empire building. There are millions of Ukrainians outside their homeland right now, waiting for the day that they can return. But that home may never exist again. This hits close for me, as you know, because my wife's family, my in-laws, are sitting here next to us waiting, hoping to go back to their beloved country. And that day may never come unless we stop picking sides and start dealing with the truth. That's the reality. Shut out the noise. Stop pretending you know when you don't. Look at the facts and don't take sides unless it's the side of truth.
So that is the introduction, the root causes of the war. Before any war begins, there are signs, there are things you'll be saying, you know that this thing could lead to war. Now, some people are on the side of Ukraine, some people are on the side of Russia. But many analysts are saying that these are the root cause of the problem. And if the root causes are not eliminated, the war continues. Now, I see this war as a war of attrition. There is so much hate that's going on in this war. Remember that Ukraine and Russia were part of USSR. before the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991. They went their separate ways. So when they went their separate ways, it was Russia that took the remnants of the warheads, most of the national treasures of the country, being the largest military unit. Russia took the whole thing and became the super world power, which has been under the umbrella of Soviet Union. Now, when Soviet Union collapsed, they had several agreements that each of these Soviet Union nations that disintegrated wouldn't join NATO. Because there was a time Tucker Carlson, the Fox News anchor person, traveled to Russia. They had an interview where Vladimir Putin told Tucker Carlson that there was a time Russia wanted to be part of NATO. But NATO people refused, and the country was kept in isolation. Now, if you look at the whole scenario, you will understand that the NATO was formed principally to avoid any incursion or any invasion of any country by a super world power like Russia. But before that time, Russia wanted to be part of the system, but they refused. That means NATO was principally formed against Russia. Now, they said that the countries that left Soviet Union should not join NATO. That means Russia doesn't want NATO to expand eastwards towards its borders because of national security. At the end of the day, many of them started joining NATO. Finland, blah, 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 joining NATO. Then Russia was angry about it. Russia was making some complaints that why are they breaching the agreement they had within that period. But many of the Soviet Union nations joined NATO until it got to the time of Ukraine, which has a close border with Russia. And the last Russia will do is to allow Ukraine to join NATO. Russia has been making these complaints in a very long time ago, and they all know it. As time progressed, we are told that the government that was friendly with Russia was ousted by the West, and they installed a government that was pro-West. What have you? That is Zelensky, a comedian turned president. Now, as things were going on, Joe Biden, who was then the US president, and Kamala and what have you, they were making some plans that Ukraine will join NATO. And they knew that this was the red line for Russia, that Russia wouldn't allow Ukraine to join NATO because of security interest. But they were just playing, thinking that it was like before. And I just want to cut the whole thing short because it's a long story. Now, there were some regions in the Ukraine that were Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. So these people were being attacked by the federal might of Ukraine, as we are told, as we are told in several analyses. So they were attacking this Luhansk region, Donbass, and whatever. So this has been ongoing. In 2014, Crimea was annexed by Russia. And we are told that Crimea was part of Russia before the Cold War and what have you. But after all this hullabaloo, Russia decided to take back Crimea in 2014 during Obama's administration. Along the line, things were still okay, but NATO was still expanding eastwards until Zelensky made bold attempts. He signed some documents to join NATO, and they were making preparations to do so. And before then, they even had the Minsk Agreement in 2014, where the German Chancellor Macron and what have you said that there would not be any kind of expansion. But it was now later released or unveiled that Minsk Agreement was just a ploy to delay the hope is that Ukraine could arm itself very well. So when Russia was watching all these things, including the way they were treating the Russian-speaking areas of, Ukraine, even banning churches, the Orthodox, what have you. So it came to the clear standard that these people didn't want peace. So that was one of the reasons why Russia said that they want to denazify, they want to demilitarize Ukraine. So when they saw these things, that was the table, that these things are going to happen, that Ukraine is making an attempt to join NATO, then Russia declared war. They didn't even call it war; they call it special military operation. They started hitting them. So what we expected Ukraine to do was to go for peace agreement. Immediately, Russia struck, but the West, principally the European countries, decided to ask Ukraine to go into full-blown war with Russia, knowing fully well that Russia is a nuclear-armed nation with almost 5,000 and something nuclear warheads. Russia is very big with large army, with large landmass, but Ukraine decided to fight Russia. Ukraine has no military industrial complex. Russia has. Russia is an independent country. Ukraine is not. Ukraine depends on the West for survival. So how could somebody in his right senses decide to go and fight a war with a country that has military industrial complex where it produces arms and ammunition on a daily basis? Even the rate at which Russia produces ammunition is far greater than what the West produces combined together. So why must somebody in his right senses decide to go into this kind of war? Ever since then, the West, the US, and the European countries have been sponsoring during the time of Joe Biden. They've poured billions of dollars into this war. Lives have been lost, properties has been lost, infrastructure is gone, everything is gone. And you know fully well that there is no way on this planet Earth that can Ukraine defeat Russia. It's not possible. Yes, Ukraine thought that with the help of the West, with the help of other countries in the West, that it will be able to defeat Russia. But up to now, the war is still ongoing, and Russia is making progress. Russia has encircled most parts of Ukraine. Russia is currently controlling 20% landmass of Ukraine. One of the major cities, the mineral size, the major infrastructure are under the control of Russia. So what is the need of fighting this war? Even the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, stated it vividly that there was no way Ukraine could win this war. In terms of comparison, in terms of army, in terms of everything, without the West, Ukraine would have been crushed the first 2 weeks of this war. But the West has been supportive, the West has been helping in intelligence, in mappings, in trainings, in supplying armaments. The West is strongly behind Ukraine. Ukraine has nothing on its own because Ukraine cannot produce arms to match the weight of the Russians. Yet the war is continuing. Now, why can't the European leaders drop their pride and come to the table and say enough is enough? Let's solve these problems so that we can save lives. Because we are talking about lives here. We are human beings. When any life is lost, life is lost. It might not affect you, might not affect you probably directly, but you should know that we are trying to save lives. And President Trump of America is fighting very hard to stop this war. For we do not know why the war is continuing, because there's no way we can defeat Russia. It's not possible. I'm told that the Ukrainian front line is almost collapsing. So what is the need of the war? Do you want to finish all the human beings in Ukraine? They're even conscripting people on the streets of Ukraine to come fight war. People that have no war experience. They put them on the war front, they're eliminated. They're wasting lives, bringing pains to families. So if people have thought about it, I just want to talk about it. So what is the European Union talking about? What are they thinking? The presidents of this country, are they not listening? Are they not seeing what is happening on the front lines? That Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. So for you to continue fighting this war means that Russia will be taking more lands, taking more infrastructure, taking more mineral sites to the detriment at the expense of the Ukrainian people. And this is not the fate of the people, it's the leaders that are causing this problem. So to me, if I were the US would just opt out of this war, ask the European Union to continue if they want to continue. Because all they're trying to do now is to drag the world into this war. And if it's not managed very well, this is what could lead to World War III. So, you see, I'm not a politician, but based on analysis, based on logic and common sense, there's no way the Ukraine can defeat Russia. So whether Russia was the invader or what have you, the only thing is to go to Moscow and resolve this amicably, as stated by Viktor Orban of Hungary. Hungary stated it that Russia is there to win. And the way he's seen it, that Ukraine has been partitioned into the West Zone, Russian zone, and the buffer zone. So why are they continuing this war? Is what I don't understand. They're only succeeding in eliminating lives, decreasing the population of Ukraine, apart from the ones that have dispatched to other countries of the world. So I'm not a politician, I'm not into war analysis, but based on what I've been listening to, what I've been hearing, what people have been saying about this war, it means that the European countries are not applying common sense in resolving this conflict that has lasted well over 3 years plus, going to 4 years. At the end of the day, they will still go back to Moscow for reconciliation. So I just want to make it short because when I see people dying, I don't like it personally. I'm from Africa, but we are all human. We are all humans. I believe in humanity. I believe in love. I believe in preservation of lives. But when people, out of stupidity, decide to say they're going to fight this war till the end, and at the end of the day, it is the people that are dying. It's not the leaders. It's not the elites. It's the soldiers that belong to families. When the soldiers die, they bring peace to their families. The families lose their loved ones. So why must you continue a war you know you cannot finish? A war you know you cannot see. Levels have changed. This is the era of drone war. They're using drones. You see what Russia is doing. They use cheap drones to overwhelm the air defense system of Ukraine. Sometimes they put up to 800 1,000 missiles, so the air defense system will be overwhelmed. There's no way you can capture all those, intercept all those weapons coming to your country. So everything is flying from left and right and center. At the end of the day, Ukraine is being destroyed. So far, so good. What has been destroyed in Ukraine cannot be recovered in the next 100 years. So this is a war that should never have started, as been said by Donald Trump. This war should not have started. It was a big mistake. It was the worst calamity that has ever happened in this world in the last 200 years. It is even worse than the Second World War. So I see this war as a war of attrition. There is so much hate between Russia and Ukraine. And it is imperative. It becomes expedient right now that the European leaders should come to their senses and understand the facts that there is no way Ukraine can win this war. It is better to go for dialogue, discuss issues, remove the root causes, and understand what Russia is asking for. Probably they have to shift ground. Russia has to understand that, yes, they can get all its objectives. So if Russia can shift ground, but most of the things will be settled based on Russian terms, not on European or the West side. This is why I'm saying it. I believe I made some points about this war. It's a war of attrition, and I hope and pray that the European leaders, the West, the US, and all of them will come to their senses and do the needful and stop the carnage that is taking place in Ukraine. Thank you so much, and try to subscribe to my channel, Attrition-Russia-Ukraine, and I see you in my next episode. Bye for now.